actually.
The mug that I chose today is my I Am Groot mug from Guardians of the Galaxy.
I love that. I can't tell you my son, he's 7, and whenever he just doesn't know what to say or gets embarrassed or shy, he's 7, that's his go-to line. I am Groot. And then just runs off. So I saw that and I'm like, oh.
The collections people are like the guardians, right? Like y'all are guardians over this stuff.
I love that. Totally.
Fits. I just love Groot so much. He's so sweet. So welcome to another episode of Quarantine Historians, maybe or maybe not drinking coffee. Are you in fact drinking coffee?
I am definitely drinking out of a mug.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your background. Part of the reason that we were doing this, that this all got started last year, was kind of give people a behind the scenes to the museum public history world. So I've been letting people talk a little bit about, like, what do you do? How did you get in the field?
Sure. Okay. Well, my name is Christian Edwards. I am currently the assistant keeper of the North Carolina Collection Gallery at UNC's Wilson Library. It's a very long term. But it's fun. The Wilson Library has 5 different collections in it, special collections, which are mostly archival print material. And so the North Carolina Collection Gallery is the museum component for the North Carolina collection. We're the only collection in the library that actually has that museum component. It was established in the 60s, and it's been written into the bylaws for the North Carolina collection to have this museum component, which has been great. We do a lot of work with other collections. So we do feature a lot of the Southern Folklife collection and rare books and Southern historical collection and all that kind of stuff. But for the most of it, it's all North Carolina based, which is perfect. I love North Carolina. I am one of those really nerdy folks. In fact, I tell people, and it's true, that my husband and I actually had a North Carolina themed wedding, where we had the state toast. My sister gave the state toast at the reception. We got married under the longleaf pine. Our take home was the honey, because the honeybee is the state insect. The only thing we were missing was the plot hound, because my mom even put Scotch bonnets, the little stage seashell, on all the tables. I mean, nerds.
Hard nerd. Yeah.
Nerds. And my husband just was like, go for it.
Oh, well, that's good, at least. He wasn't like,
yeah. Right. But yeah, so both my parents were history teachers. I grew up loving history. We traveled to all the battlegrounds and forts and historic sites that we could see growing up. It was just fun. I find history fascinating. So when I got to college, I realized that history was the only class I was actually passing in. So I decided to make it my major. With the at first my goal was actually to be a teacher like my parents, and as I went through, I decided that probably wasn't best, so not for me.
Why?
It's hard. It's really, really hard. After this past year in quarantine, where I was juggling work and teaching my son, luckily he's in 1st grade, so I could still do the math. But it takes a special person to be a public school teacher. And I'm not sure my humor and outlook would really go well with the kids, because I'm a little dry and sarcastic. Yeah. So I decided not to go into teaching and continue on to graduate school. And at that point, I was going to be a college professor. That was my goal. Mm-hmm. I know. Shape young minds. but then I found museums for I went to graduate school at Western Carolina University. They have a wonderful museum there. It's called the Mountain Heritage Center. And I was lucky enough to actually do a 300-hour summer internship at this museum. And so it was pretty intense. And I loved it. I got to do crafty things with like implement and create exhibits. I got to do kid things where we had kid camps and history and science camps. But the best part was the old stuff. I loved the artifacts. I mean, you got to touch history. These are the tools that people used and how we advanced as a people and a society. And I just got the bug. It just kind of all clicked. And I loved the lofty theoretical parts of museums, right. But just to actually touch the stuff that you can't touch in a museum, I was hooked. So I graduated, and I like all of people in your graduate class, you're all searching and scrambling for the jobs. And there was a position that opened up at the Thomas Wolfe Memorial in Asheville, which is a state historic site, as you know. And it's just a little boarding house dedicated to an author that I actually hadn't read at that point or even really heard of. Right? And so I hit my stride. I loved the folks that I worked with. I loved the time period, which is early 20th century. I'll say this, I actually still don't like his writing, but, I'm cool with that.
I'm not judging. I've made it through part of Look Homeward Angel. And I'm like, right. Yeah, it's a lot.
Before the interview, I tried reading that novel on the beach, and I read the first 2 pages about 4 times. It was the most beautiful writing I have ever read. But when you only have 3 sentences that takes up 4 pages, it's hard to stay with it. So, but I can say I have pushed myself and read his writings, and I appreciate the snapshot of American culture, history, and society that he was able to capture. Yeah. I don't know if I will actually go back and reread his works. Maybe his short stories. I don't mind those, but his novels.
I agree.
It's
long-winded.
Very long-winded, and he makes up words.
He does.
So if you read it on your Kindle and you try to highlight a word, even Kindle's like, I don't know. Thomas Wolfe, I started there as an interpreter. And I started out as an interpreter too, which is just code, whatever. But I was in charge. Yeah, it was. So I
sidebar, there is another interview that I did with Frischelle, and I told her a story about when I interviewed for the Historic Interpreter 2 at Stagville, and I thought I was interviewing for a tour, basically a tour guide position, and I was interviewing for the assistant site manager. So the code matters, to know what the code means, and it's different each site. It's not always the same.
It's totally different, because even back then I was the interpreter too, but we also had we had the site manager, and we also had a programs manager, an interpreter 3, and I was hired as the 2, and we had an office assistant. I know, I got hired in 2006, so that's before
was your job.
Yeah, I was in charge. It was the perfect job. I'm not going to lie. Even when I interviewed, they were like, because I had managerial experience in my past, and they were like, why don't you come back and apply for the 3? Because they do part-time management. I did not want to do that. I wanted to do education and collections, and that's what the interpreter 2 at Wolfe did. Mm-hmm. So I was like, thank you, but this is what I want. And I started out, and it was perfect. I got to learn so much about the museum dynamics, about collections management, programming, interpretation. Just so many facets of museum life that we all experience as public historians. That's my origin story.
That's your origin story. I love that. Oh man. Yeah. So what happened? What happened next?
I'm glad you asked.
Tell me more.
So I was in the interpreter 2 position for 6 years or so and loved it. It was one of those jobs that every day on the way into work, I was looking forward to it. I worked with a great team. We did, we experimented with programs, and we were always looking for something new. And it was great. Loved it. But then everything just kind of flew up in the air. Our site manager, who had been there for 30 something years, and good friend of mine who I thoroughly love. But when he retired, the operations manager moved up, and loved working with him. I was so excited. And but his position got cut. So we lost a staff position. And then we lost another staff position. So our team got smaller and smaller. And when Chris, the site manager at the time, decided to move up to Vance, I think you've actually talked to Chris here, I decided to apply for the site manager position. And you know how sometimes you leave an interview and you just feel like you nailed it?
Yeah.
I did it that day. And God, it was terrible. I ended up getting the job. So then I was in I loved being the manager. I loved the creativity that you can do in that manager spot, with programs. And I actually don't mind managing staff. I thought that was fun, and working with the community and finding, people of like minds. But as you know, being a manager is hard. There's lots to juggle, not only just your site and all of the managerial stuff, but a lot of stuff coming down from above in Raleigh that's not really there on the ground to see it. And at that point in historic sites, I found that there was very little work-life balance, where you were just kind of on call all the time. I don't know if that's still the case. I hear that there's a lot more of a push for a good balance, which is what we needed.
Yeah.
So at that point, we started looking at Raleigh. My husband's job was able to transfer him down. And then the position came open as the registrar curator for state historic sites. And I was able to call the curator, Martha Battle Jackson, and just let her know that I was interested in it, and just, heads up, I'm going to apply. And she was excited because we'd worked together a lot and really well in the past. And it was a very nerve-wracking interview, and that was the one that I left that I was like, I hope I got it. So it wasn't one of those confident interviews.
Yeah.
And but I did. I got the job down in Raleigh. I was able to really focus on collections. And I love, like I said earlier, love artifacts and just, touching the past. It's just something really cool and electrifying about that. So started as the registrar curator. I learned a lot about registration, that there's a definite science and art behind collections management and processing, and just the whole kit and caboodle there. As someone who loved historic sites, it was actually kind of a very hard decision. The job was actually advertised. One of my colleagues, actually now my supervisor, mentioned it to me almost in passing that it was, available. And I started reading through the job description, and it was at UNC, the flagship University of North Carolina. It was all about North Carolina history. I would be doing exhibits. I would be doing tours. I would be doing collections management was the top thing, top tier. But everything else was there too, kind of going back to the basics of public history, getting out of that, expanding that specialized field of collections that I was in and really taking it to a little bit broader. But it was a hard choice. In fact, there's lots of historic sites colleagues that I really talked to and kind of explored this option because, again, I love what historic sites does and is able to do for our state and history. but I'm not gonna lie, the pay was good. The
Right. Historic sites is so fun, but it's like pays worse than any other museum world.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's actually been some pay bumps since then. But yeah, so I looked at it. I didn't have to travel as much. My son was just at that point getting into grade school where I needed to be home to pick him up in the afternoons and not, rushing back from the mountains or the coast and hopefully get there in time.
Right.
At that point, my husband also found a new job where he was on the road quite a bit, and we just kind of switched where he went on the road and I was able to stay home a lot. And it was a struggle. It was a struggle to adjust to UNC, especially working in a library, much like I felt with historic sites, that it was a public history site. Some folks were a living history site with kind of the museum just kind of attached to it. Then it's almost the same way with the library, where it's a research library. It's librarians. They have no idea about museum stuff. Just like I had to completely relearn how libraries worked. I mean, I haven't done library research, not in the broad sense, since grad school.
Right.
And I mean, they finding aids versus collections records. I mean, it's just a different discussion. Just the techniques, the vocabulary, the methods that they used are just completely different than what museums do. Same arena, but different game. But when I first got there, we had just a big old, basically an Excel spreadsheet for our collections management. It was through the FileMaker Pro system, but it's a glorified Excel spreadsheet. And very hard to operate. So I've been able to kind of take the reins on that, and we have a new management system that we're going to launch, and it'll be fun. We'll actually get it available for the public on the web. And so all of a sudden I'm starting to develop goals and objectives that we can actually start to achieve.
Like, what is the difference between archives and museums?
I'm going to try to answer that because I'm still learning. Thinking about archives and what it's there for. It is there for people to research, to actually explore files and letters and journals. And at first I did not like that. I don't want people touching my stuff. I'm sorry, the artifacts. It's mine. You get very possessive of, you're in charge of it. You take care of it. But so it was a little bit of a thought adjustment for me to really make sure that the objects that we had were accessible in some way for the public to research. I find the value in actually looking at the progressions of objects and material goods, how they have progressed and how they have changed, and how that reflects the change in society and us as a culture. And archivists do the same thing, but they do it with like the written word, the letters that people leave behind, the journals. And so that's their goal. They want to make sure that it's preserved and accessible, but they are okay with people like actually exploring through the files, because they don't go through and actually say this letter written at this date, and these are all the words that are in this one letter. It's becoming more digitized, especially over this past year. But for many of the pieces in the archives, they don't have it down to that item level documentation. For collections and how museums work is that we actually have that item level description. So an example, we had a collection come in, and it was mostly archival, but the only way they were able to donate it was that if the library also took objects. I think this is for the Southern Historical Collection, which is all of the South, and it was actually for a Kentucky African-American coal miner family up, obviously in Kentucky. And so they actually came in with various pieces, random things, and a wedding dress, an old prom dress, as well as tools, helmets, a carbide lamp, stuff like that. So it was very mixed media type stuff. And so I talked to the tech folks, the folks that actually go through and kind of identify what's in a collection, and they just do it at the folder level. Group of letters dated from this date. Here's some important names that stick out. That's about it.
Right.
And I was like, no, you need to write the size. You need to tell the condition. You need to say what exactly is written on the objects. Everything like per piece. And our tech person was like, we're not doing that.
What are some of the challenges when it comes to collecting from, disenfranchised groups? And then also, like the backside, when you collect, like, how do you record that information for people to search for it?
Man, what a challenging time for archives, museums, any kind of collecting entity. And not really hard on them to collect, but almost hard to really look back at yourself and analyze how you got to that point. Most museums is the holdover of this colonial idea of this white man's history. We're raising above. We want to remember, and sometimes in some early museums, praise and capture a shot of history that in a lot of cases weren't true for the majority of folks. Absolutely. Such a time for reflection. And I think that it's a fun, I'm going to use the word fun, an exciting time to actually be a part of that movement, to really move away from that idea of museums having the pretty history, the history that's accessible for some, but not for all. Way. Now for UNC, it's been great because it's a very much a like-minded goal to really bring out those hidden voices within the archives, those people that are often overlooked. For us, we've actually done a conscious editing group that goes in and looks at the language of finding aids for certain collections, where we found where we're just standardizing a lot of the language. We're actually bringing out the folks that might have been mentioned in some of the collection pieces, but not even identified in the finding aid. Kind of getting down to that level description. There was one instance, and I can't remember the name of the collection, but it was a white planner, and he mentioned twin enslaved girls. And even in the processing of that collection, they were misidentified in the finding aid. It's just they have wrong names, but they have like 2 slaves, and that's it. So unless you're looking for slave in the finding aid vocabulary, it wouldn't come up. Trying to make sure that we don't create an other. And by that, I mean, like, we're going through our archives, and we're actually, and collections database. I've been working on this too, where instead of just identifying like African-American artisans, we also identify white artisans, so that it's not just assumed that if someone's not identified that they're white. So we're trying to really rise to the moment that we are in 2021 and make sure that it's an equal identifiers. And a lot of these finding aids for archives, a lot of the object descriptions for museums takes way more than one person's career to go through and actually update things. And for UNC, you add in that very difficult racial history that goes with our institution. On top of that, it's a lot to uncover and mine out. I mean, the Southern Historical Collection at Wilson Library at UNC was actually started kind of as a way to promote white supremacy. And it definitely is not today, by far from that. But that's just it takes a hard look at ourselves to see what's missing and to see what's wrong and to fix it. What we've been doing, actually, this year has provided us a great opportunity. We've been, the conscious editing team through Wilson Library has actually really started attacking a lot of those older collections. We have a team group that no matter who's in the library, if they come across a collection with offensive or outdated language or misinformation that's out there, we can just shoot it out to the team that's working on it and say, have you looked at this collection yet? You just have to go through and be very much aware of the words, the vernacular that you're using. One of the examples that was presented to me during a recent conference on bringing in diversity into our collections was you can't avoid outdated or offensive language. I mean, you just can't with historical records. But the way you describe and you interpret that, even in the collections management, would be important. The example they used was how to process a book that was a textbook for the deaf and dumb students. And that's just the title of the book. Obviously outdated, obviously offensive in many ways by today's society. And the example, the moderator responded saying, well, you have the title, textbook for the deaf and dumb, but the descriptor wouldn't be followed saying a textbook used for deaf and dumb students. Right. So, but again, it's taking that time to actually go through and read up on, for the collection gallery that I work at, 40,000 records and just kind of do a full record audit. I'm just a player here. I am a temporary keeper of the collection, and I'm going to do what I can to improve it, knowing that those behind me are going to improve it better. But I'm going to get them to the best spot I can to make that happen. Again, I like the lofty ideals of museums and this theoretical approach. It's just great. I love what we do. It's such a nerdy thing.
But are you now the president of the North Carolina Museums Council?
I am now president of the North. Yeah, that's me. Well, you're now the history section chair, right? Because you got voted in last week. So I hope you know.
I don't know if you know. However, I sent an email about that today.
Well, I'm brand new to the position, so I haven't quite flushed it out yet. So we'll see how this goes. But so the North Carolina Museums Council, it's actually a nonprofit board, all volunteer group that actually is here to help museum professionals be better. Whether or not it's through better interpretation, better collection skills, better program development. And it's not just for history, but it's art, science, children, and history museums all across the state. Not only are we here to help the professionals develop in their field and their specialty, but also we're here to advocate. We have a advocacy group that actually goes up to Raleigh during the North Carolina Arts Day to actually lobby legislators there. But we also have some folks that go up to Washington, D.C. during the Museum Advocacy Day there on Capitol Hill. It's really great that I know that I can pick up the phone and call someone to either about an object or about a historic interpretation even that I just have a question about. There was a question on, what's the best term between American Indian or Native American, just something like that. And, you can Google it, but what I did was I actually called the site manager down at Town Creek Indian Mound, Rich, and I was like, Rich, what's going on? You're in this field. Help me understand. And of course, he knew it right off the top of his head. And I felt like that was way more valid and justifiable than Googling it. So, it's a great way to actually meet your colleagues, to not feel so isolated. So many sites, even the gallery, it's just Linda and I full time. So we are a tiny tiny work group.
Right.
And it gets very isolating. You feel like you're working on it all by yourself, and you just got to get through it. And to have those colleagues and that backup, you have that backup there. And even just to commiserate. I mean, the best thing in the world is just to sit around like this and talk to colleagues and like, are you dealing with this? Because this is terrible.
Yeah. No, I agree. I really appreciate you taking time to sit down and talk about how you do what you do in the field. And
Thank you. I was nervous about this. I didn't know if we could talk for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And but yeah, right.
We could keep going. I really
Actually, we could. Yeah, let me know when this is ready. My mom's already asking for the link. I mean, you know, parents, they are our biggest fan. Also, she was like, are you kidding me? The first weekend I started my real job, she was up at Thomas Wolfe. She took 2 tours that day. And I was like, Mom.
Oh my gosh. I joke about how family are like permanent volunteers. My whole family used to volunteer at Stagville for all of our programs because they live nearby. And my husband Taylor has like volunteered at so many programs. So yeah, I fully understand.
Yeah, they would drive all the way up from Asheville, which was like 4.5 hours to like volunteer for our programs because they were so excited. So I think my dad was just excited I actually got a job with a history degree.
Right? They're like, we're here to support it. Right. Good for you. Yeah, I get it. Oh my gosh.
All right, Kim.
All right.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.